Welcome to the Eat, Play, Love Fall Series. I'm Sandra Aaliyah, Director of Education and Patient Advocacy at Obesity Matters. Meet my co-host, Rachel Atkins.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, a Director of Strategy. So excited to be here and so excited about our guest today.
Yes. Obesity Matters is a nonprofit organization for people living with elevated weight and obesity. It was formed by patient advocates whose focus is to provide evidence-based education and advocate for public policy and environmental changes that will enable well-being. And if we can do that, we are one step closer to the acceptance and inclusion of millions of people in larger bodies. The Eat, Play, Love Fall Series runs weekly interactive events with experts. The first half of the episode is an interview, and then we turn the spotlight on you, the audience, to address your questions and comments in a safe and supportive environment. This season, we really want to reflect on our transition out of quarantine. We survived, hopefully, we thrived, we transformed the normality of our lives over the last few months. And because of that, we are more thankful and mindful than ever of our health and how far we've come in our journeys. So today, our special guest is Dr. David Macklin, a family physician who spent his entire career working in obesity medicine. Dr. Macklin has a knack for taking the complicated science around obesity and making it simple and, dare I say, fun to understand. And in understanding obesity as a medical condition, the hope is that it helps you release any blame and shame you may be experiencing and debunk the myth that obesity is a lifestyle choice. He will join us to discuss and answer two seemingly simple questions. Why is obesity a medical condition, and how can we treat it? David, we're thrilled to have you with us today. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your areas of interest in obesity management.
Sure. Thank you, Sandra. And thank you so much for inviting me. And I've been really excited about this opportunity to share with everyone some of my experience and to discuss what, unfortunately, yet as of still today, is an under-discussed concept of living with obesity as a real medical condition and a condition for which treatment exists for and support exists for. I mean, myself, I'm a family doc. I run a very kind of a well thought of weight management program at the downtown MedCan clinic. I run a program at the Mount Sinai Hospital as well. I'm a co-author of our national guidelines. Just 6 months ago or so, we published a guidelines that took us a number of years to write that described to all healthcare practitioners globally the concepts that we'll be talking about today. Struggling with weight is a real condition, one for which treatment exists. And and yes, I come from a neuroscience background and a psychology background into medical school, and then have kind of just naturally fallen into this area. And I've been doing this for 18 years. I've been practicing medicine in the field of weight management, which is yeah, anyway, so I hope to share, my experiences and any inspiration from my experiences as well. Thanks for having me.
So excited that you're here, Dr. Macklin. My first question is, I think you have such an amazing definition for the term obesity. And I also have noticed that I've heard you say and use the word progressive in your definition. Can you tell us how you describe obesity and how is it progressive?
Right. So there's maybe even 3 points there for why. So we describe obesity as a primarily genetically conferred. People are often very surprised to learn that 70% of someone's risk of struggling with weight in their lifetime is passed down from their parents. And also surprised to learn that the majority of those genes are in the brain. We consider obesity, understand the risk of obesity to be a brain-centered condition where we all inherit a unique appetite system that in our brain is where weight is regulated and appetite and metabolism, all the things that determine our actual weight are determined in our unique appetite system. And obviously that appetite system has collided with a modern food environment. Our appetite system where weight is regulated was actually built, I guess we don't need much imagination to consider, it was built for a time when calories were scarce, right? Or could be scarce. And work was required to find food. So we needed to be driven and motivated to find food. And of course, that collides with this modern food environment where we're surrounded by, and we're kind of desensitized to it, right? Like we think this is a normal food environment to some degree, but some of you might remember when, if you checked out at a hardware store, beside the cash register was maybe some nails. And now there's rows of chocolate bars and cookies and candy. And, that's just one example of the changes that have happened in the environment. So why progressive? Well, it's I'm sometimes accused of being the bearer of bad news, but bear with me. So one of the reasons struggling with weight is a progressive condition and understood as such is because of the following. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. It may be new or not new information. But our brains are extremely effective and skilled at defending against weight loss. Whatever the highest weight we have reached in our lives, our brain can, and there's some differences in theories here, but the general gist is that our brains bookmark our highest weight. And as soon as we try to go lower, fat loss and weight loss is expertly recognized by the bottom part of our brain. I call the gatekeeper or the homeostatic system or the hypothalamus. The bottom of our brain is fantastic at recognizing fat loss. As soon as we start losing weight, it actually does that because a hormone called leptin gets created from fat cells. So as soon as leptin levels start dropping because we're losing fat, our brain recognizes it and fights against that. How does it defend against weight loss? It defends by increasing our appetite and motivation and drive to food and decreasing our metabolic rate, all in favor of weight regain. And why? It's because if our ancestors lost weight, it wasn't to look good for a wedding. It was because the food supply was interrupted, right? So that's why the system works this way. So by progressive, we mean whatever heightened weight we reach, and the higher we do reach, the brain will defend against us losing weight. A second way that it's progressive is our appetite system, and I invite everyone to not overthink this, it works in a Pavlovian way. What that means is whatever the settings around us are, where we're enjoying hyper palatable and tasty food, like for example, growing up, every day, literally, my brothers and I would go into our basement and watch TV after dinner. And we'd have cookies or ice cream and kind of tasty foods. And a Pavlovian learning takes place such that the setting of couch TV end of day gets paired with tasty food enough times until eventually, through a progressive nature, through what's called a reward learning or associative learning, eventually the setting itself of the evening becomes a trigger to activate my midbrain, which is the center of wanting and desire and urge. So just the evenings now can become a trigger for someone who's created those associations. And the more times the pairings happen, the stronger the wanting becomes, the drive in those moments. That's just two examples. There's a few more, but I'll leave it at that. And all of those points, just to be very clear, the points that I'm making here are for the following reasons. People who live with struggling with weight will internalize what is external, which we call bias and stigma and discrimination. Individuals who struggle with weight, I see 16 patients a day, will consider that their struggle with weight is because of some flaw in character or lack of willpower, or just not disciplined enough, or maybe I didn't find the right diet, or I'm not exercising enough, and I'm here to strongly suggest and invite you to consider otherwise. And that instead, struggling with weight is struggling with a real medical condition, again, centered in the brain, conferred genetically, and progressive. In other words, it becomes more and more difficult to manage over time. Not your fault, and certainly something for which treatment exists.
Oh boy, there's a lot in there that could be considered a hard pill to swallow, Dr. Macklin. There's a lot of debate about how we get to that highest weight that we ultimately, as you say, start to defend. And there's certainly also a ton of debate when it comes to the role of movement and diet and how we can change that weight. I've heard you tell a really good story before about the physiology and actually what's going on in our body. Can you share that with us?
Tell me more, the physiology of which, Rachel?
Oh, there's some great slides if you want to share that with us about the story of obesity.
Oh, I see. Yeah, so I've broken down, if I'm, my challenge, and what this program does so well, and it's so underserviced. This concept is when we wrote our national clinical practice guidelines, and when I wrote co-authored the behavioral chapter with Michael Vallis, we've come forward and suggested that the foundation of supporting those who struggle with weight is to address internalized weight bias. We've described how there exists, as I've mentioned earlier even today, a suspicion or a thought pattern in those who struggle with weight because of the world we live in and the stigmatization that surrounds us, that somehow struggling with weight is a flaw in character. And so why I describe stories to describe the condition of obesity is to help challenge that internalized and to counter that internalized weight bias. So for example, I've spent time creating a video called The Gatekeeper, The Go-Getter, and The Sleepy Executive, 3 characters that I've used to describe the 3 layers of the human appetite system where weight is regulated, because neuroscience is quite complicated and psychology is pretty complicated. So there's cartoons, there's simple descriptions. And so, for example, the character that I've used to describe what defends weight is, we call him or her the gatekeeper, and they're expert at recognizing fat loss and activating the next level. The next level is where wanting is generated. We already described wanting. We call that the go-getter. If anyone's ever owned a pet and had a pet, if you ever want to understand wanting and the drive, the primary symptom of struggling with weight, people have dogs. I've got some pictures here, so nod your head if you have or have ever had a dog. Yeah, okay, we've got some. Perfect. Okay, Cindy, thank you for nodding your head. Thank you, Lisa. That's perfect. And so, you ever notice how your dogs know when they're about to get food? Right? There's a certain thing you do, or a cupboard you go to, or right, or something that you say, or once they know that they're getting food, do they ever let up at that point and say, oh, you know what, later's fine. If you want to take your time, you can go away, and you know what, I'll just be here, and that's chill, that's cool. You know, I'm gonna just live. I'm gonna have a nap while but you know, I thought I was getting food, but I'm not. They never drop it. Their mind is, once they see they're getting food, that's called wanting. It's actually this laser beam attention bias based on a set of cues, right? This cupboard means food. My owner just went and opened up that cupboard, and now I can't think about anything else, and really that kind of focus. Now, I know we like to think of ourselves as pretty sophisticated, us humans. You know, we get dressed up and we send, you know, rockets into space and everything in between. But the primary processes that will drive an individual and steal their attention towards calories and put them at risk of taking in more than they necessarily need happens in the subconscious parts of our brain, and it's called wanting. And we share these phenomena actually with dogs and even mice. And that's meant to destigmatize the struggle, because then you start to realize, oh, so there's a reflexive neurological event that happens in my brain that has been conditioned over time, that's in a part of the brain that is genetically variable, and that I was born with a higher risk of having that part of my brain feel stronger and steal my attention more. Yes, that helps explain those people that you want to strangle. You know, the person who eats a quarter of a cookie and says, hey, do you want the rest? And you're like, what are you talking about? Or they eat half their meal and they're like, didn't you enjoy it? And like, oh no, I loved it, but I'm just done. I'm like, they're not interested. It's an apathy. It's so you see this real normal distribution amongst humans of the strength of wanting and desire and the conditioning, but it's a destigmatizing message, because it actually happens when our mom and dad and their genes get passed down to us, and in previous generations, and conditioning that took place in this environment. And so you'll see that these stories have a prime aim, which is to help an individual understand that struggling with weight is not their fault. Why is that so important? Because they've been told, one, it's their fault all along, even by healthcare practitioners. And this is a grand apology if you've ever sat across from a healthcare practitioner who said, well, why don't you just lose weight or go on this diet or work out more or just go to the gym, or you're going to get diabetes, and didn't I tell you last year? And you really... So I'm a grand apology, if I may, from the healthcare community, because the science of weight management has not permeated necessarily into all the levels of the healthcare world. And so where we're getting there, that's one of my jobs, one of my missions in life is to train physicians to understand more and more these phenomena. So long-winded
Yes.
answer.
No, such a good answer. And I think it really brings to light that obesity is way more than, body weight or body image, but really a human vulnerability, that somebody living with obesity may be struggling on an emotional, physical level as well, and that it's a vulnerable subject. And you say struggling with weight is the leading preventable cause of death on the planet. Yet the healthcare system. Oh, did I?
No, I said that. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It
Yeah.
sounds scary. So, but yes, go
Well,
on.
do you know
Leading
what?
yeah.
It really does hit home for me, because I lost my mother to obesity at the age of 69. So when I read that, it really hits home for me that could have been prevented if she didn't pass away 15 years ago, because things are changing and we do have doctors like yourself today. And yet the healthcare system doesn't seem to attune to the science, and it's still riddled with weight bias that many of us have experienced. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that, and maybe what can we do as a patient if we feel we're experiencing that weight bias?
Such a good question, Sandra. And so, I get that question a lot also, which is, why does this bias exist? And I had a very great psychologist, Michael Vallis, describe this once to me, that there's this. So bias, by the way, what does bias mean? Bias means automatic attitudes and thoughts. So not things that people are deliberating on and weighing the benefits and costs of this statement. These are thoughts that come and attitudes that come to them automatically through conditioning through their lifetime. So why does someone have bias against someone who struggles with weight? First of all, it's damaging, and I rally against it in my entire career. But what Michael described, I'm curious your thoughts on this, everyone, right? Is he says, one of the biases of humans is something that's called the American ethic, right? That if I really want something, if I really want something and it's really important to me and I work hard, I should be able to get it. And if I don't get it, then I just have to work harder, right? So, so for example, in business, yeah, if someone doesn't reach their sales targets at the end of the month and they have a meeting and what could we do better? Could we change marketing? Sure, that makes sense in business, but that doesn't make sense in biology and medicine whatsoever. And so, but yet the bias is within humans. And so someone might in their mind think, well, if that person really wanted to, and they really cared, and they really tried hard enough, which is nonsense. By the way, it's hard for me to say those words, by the way, when it's related to someone who's struggling with weight. But yes, that's the attitude out there. But then we contrast that idea. So to answer your question of what we do about it, one of the absolute keys is communicating the invitation. I never tell anyone anything. I invite people. The invitation to, would you consider that struggling with weight is a real condition conferred genetically, centered in the brain, progressive, strongly environmentally influenced by our obesogenic food environment, and something that is not someone's fault, and something that actually now we know is significantly treatable. So it's an invitation. So what do you mean genetic? And so we go through the twin studies that describe how there's this incredible pass down. What do you mean it's all centered in the brain? Well, we see these MRI studies between those who struggle with appetite and weight compared to those who don't. What do you mean genetic, and how would that play out? Well, does that mean that if two people eat the same amount of calories, one person will gain more weight than the other person? Absolutely. We have all the science established. If anyone actually wants to sit down and go through the science, it's all there, but bias prevents that. But yeah, you know that there's people who, when they overeat, there are people when they just consume more calories than they're burning. In response to that, their genetics makes their metabolism go up, so they just will burn off acutely all the extra calories that they've taken in, and whatever they can't burn off gets turned into muscle.
Who are these people?
Oh, I mean, come on.
Not fair.
Yeah. But wait a second. Unfortunately, I don't mean to point fingers, but these are also the sources of where bias could come from. Because to them, even if they take in more, their appetite goes down later and they don't even gain weight anyway, and it just helps them turn to muscle, and they feel like heroes maybe and feel like they're so good. But So yes, by
Yes.
communicating, to answer your question, by communicating the genetics, the neurology, the environmental changes that have taken place since the 70s, the progressive nature of the condition, and that it's treatable, because we're in a remarkable stage kind of now in supporting individuals who struggle with weight. And so all of those principles counter internalized weight bias, at least internalized weight bias,
Yeah.
where I have patients say, you know what, I used to think this way and now I'm really understanding. And it's quite a, no pun intended, quite a weight lifted
Yeah.
to understand that one is not at fault and one is with a real condition like asthma or multiple sclerosis or any other real hypertension, any other real medical condition. In fact, right, even more of a complex medical condition in the risk of obesity.
Yeah. So in your time, you've been practicing weight management for many years. You've seen countless patients. Do you see any patterns that set people up for success in terms of their thinking, their environment? What have you noticed anything in your patients who do achieve some success?
That's a little bit of a tricky question for me, Sandra. Why? It's a tricky question for me because let's switch out obesity and let's put in asthma, or let's put in ulcerative. Is there something about someone that, you know, makes it in your experience as a gastroenterologist for them to be more successful at managing their ulcerative colitis, right? Which of course we would say, yes, receiving comprehensive, ethical, and supportive treatment for their real medical condition would be the predictor of them being able to do well. And so it's a little bit of a trick question for me because my first and second and third answer would be, well, really what it should be. The predictor of someone being able to manage their weight long term would be them receiving supportive, ethical, evidence-based, and comprehensive support for their real medical condition. That's where we're dropping the ball, the medical community. That's not someone's fault. That's if anything, again, back to my kind of grand apology. And so you know, if we look at the guidelines we just published, my answer would be receiving ethical and evidence-based and supportive treatment and countering internalized weight bias, which is the foundation of effective treatment.
Yeah, yeah. Over to you, Rachel.
So Dr. Macklin, you talked about the bias in the healthcare system. And, you know, some of those individuals that have won the genetic lottery, they're also our friends and our family that think they know the right way to do it and they just need to teach us. So, you know, my question would be, you know, what, for those of us that are living in larger bodies, you know, struggling with obesity and overweight, what is it we can do to advocate for ourselves and our current circumstance when we're faced with having conversations, whether they're healthcare practitioners or friends or family?
Well, such a good question. What can you do? I mean, I think the first number of steps is becoming more and more familiar with what are the modern communications of living with obesity and it being a real medical condition. So there are organizations like yours. There's organizations like Obesity Canada, which is by the way, I don't know if everyone knows. Does everyone know that Canada, on a global scale, is considered to be the leading country in the recognition and the support and treatment of those who are struggling with weight? Wherever I travel all over the world, and there's usually 2 or 3 other Canadians, you know, they're speaking as well. There's like 8 people speaking and 4 of them are from Canada. And so that's recognized internationally. And one of the reasons why is because of Obesity Canada, a really phenomenal organization that goes back to about 2003, 2004, and the founding by really our fearless leader back then, and in a way still spiritually, though he's moved back to Germany, Arya Sharma. And really becoming more and more familiar with there's, you know, the Gatekeeper, GoGetter, Sleepy Executive video on YouTube, really getting these kind of talking points. And then once you become more kind of in an understanding position of struggling with weight as a real condition, I would suggest the other one is just sticking to your guns and knowing that you're right, because you'll doubt yourself because of maybe some experiences and internalized weight bias, but stick to your guns and know that you've got all of science behind you And we're on a path to obesity more and more recognized within the medical community as a real condition, and outside the medical community. So one, education around this as a real condition, and then really sticking to your guns, and feeling confident when you make such statements. It's hard to communicate. I get that. I get that all the time. Patients are like, I wish you were there. I didn't know exactly what to say. And I didn't exactly, because they were saying, well, no, it's just about carbs, right? And I know you guys won't be able to say, well, actually, you know, if people are doing a ketogenic diet, or they're doing a low carb diet, or they're doing intermittent fasting, those diets are based on a principle or a hypothesis called the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis, where insulin stores fat, and that eating these types of foods is the genesis of struggling with weight, and just switching out those foods for protein and vegetables cures everything. And so someone will say that and feel very strong and say that to you and feel very kind of empowered about their messaging. And I know it would be very hard for all of you to say, well, actually, the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. In fact, all the most recent clinical trials have shown that that there is no best diet for weight loss. And eating healthily is a beautiful subject, and exercising is a wonderful behavior, but those are not the methods by which someone will treat struggling with weight or the risk of obesity. And there is no best diet. I know that would be hard for someone to feel, I can, because I've read the papers, and and I have some letters after my name and some experience in this. But so that's what I mean by kind of education, and then sticking to your guns, kind of, and just knowing you're on the right side of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I sort of separate the way I eat and the reason why I exercise from my weight. So I try to eat in a way that gives me energy and makes me feel good. And I move my body every day for a ton of reasons that have nothing to do with weight loss. And Amazing. In that way, I can stay more motivated, because if I'm always looking at the scale, that's one way to totally derail myself and not want to continue. What our final question that we ask of every single guest is, what support can Obesity Matters as a very young nonprofit organization do to offer help to our community? Any guidance for us?
Well, if advocating for oneself involves education and then confidence in communicating principles of obesity as a real medical condition, this has been my experience. This all starts with countering internalized weight bias. It might sound like yes, there's principles of treatment and we can talk about those. And yes, this is a treatable condition. And yes, it's not about diet and exercise. But it all starts with really shifting the needle, the pendulum, on the belief that is still ubiquitous, that somehow struggling with weight is just about discipline and willpower and trying hard enough and finding the right diet and working out enough. And if someone's not doing that, then they're not succeeding, then clearly it's a moral failure. And so sadly, 2021, when I've been doing this since so long ago, sadly, we're still at that starting point. So what you guys as a nonprofit organization can do is really keep tools and strategies and events like this that communicate and counter the processes of external and internalized weight bias. And really kind of sad to say we're still at this stage. I'd like to say, promote principles of treatment, because now, right, if where we are with depression, it is a real condition, and now promote in the workplace and support with medications and support with more benefits in their group benefits for psychologists, or right. I mean, so, you could see that's where we want, I guess we'll be in 5 or 10 years, right? But in the meantime, we're still at that first stage of countering internalized and external weight bias. Yeah. So that's what I'd suggest. Yeah.
The sentence that pops into my head listening to you is, no one chooses obesity. And I think if we start from that place, and that non-judgmental approach will allow us to find treatment options, real treatment options that are based in evidence. So the floor is now open for audience questions. We will alternate between live questions and ones in the chat box in order or relevance. We encourage you to turn on your camera when you're ready to ask your question, introduce yourself, let us know where you're tuning in from. Please raise your hand virtually using the Zoom feature. So the floor is now open for questions. We're going to check in with Rosie in the chat box because I saw a lot of them coming in.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Sandra. We have a question from Andrea Shepard, and it's a follow-up to something that Dr. Macklin had mentioned in his remarks. She has read that about 15% of the population has those genes that keep people lean versus about 85% of the population has genes that favor obesity. Is this accurate?
The scientific, thank you for the question. The scientific method of answering that question is one of the disciplines in science is called twin studies. And the twin science and twin studies are a really well-validated format of scientific inquiry. There's also really fantastic new technology called GWAS, Genome-Wide Association Studies. And both of these studies, study methods, are landing somewhere around 70% of, let me put it exactly clear. The variability in weights in humans in our modern environment, 70% of the variability of weight in humans is determined to be genetic, right? And so, of course, in the year 1900, we didn't know who was going to be vulnerable to obesity because the environment hadn't changed. And we were not surrounded by ultra-processed, ultra-hyper-palatable food that is ultra-portioned, that is ultra-available, that is marketed in a really often deceptive way to have unhealthy and processed foods be marketed as healthy. And the customs of eating only at, I don't know if you know, in the 1950s, people only ate at meals. You know that, and that's still in some European countries, right? So people ate 3 meals a day at something called a table with people they call their family, and then you ate and you sat, you talked, and now it's this grab and go, which really it really messes up executive self-regulation, top-down capacity or awareness around our eating, and ultra-processed foods do a whole bunch of things to our brains. And so when the environment changed, those who were genetically vulnerable started to become more clear, right? But naturally, that's my statement, and I'll stick to it, is that the way the environment has changed, it is extremely natural that those with genetic vulnerability will struggle with weight in this modern food environment. It's extremely natural and predictable, right? And not someone's fault. Right?
Thank you. Rochelle, you have your hand up. Did you want to turn on your camera, introduce yourself, and let us know where you're tuning in from?
Sure, yes.
Oh, look at that kitty.
Has decided to join me too.
Wonderful.
Thanks for that. Thank you for this very informative session. So I've worked in healthcare. And so as you mentioned, it's very well documented, the weight bias within the medical system. So my question is, what would be a good article, a good resource to share with a healthcare provider that is accepted versus saying, oh, I heard this and somebody said this, and then it comes across as you can't get your act together and you're making excuses again.
Ouch. So I mean,
I would really like to have.
Thank you, Rochelle. Great question.
Scientific says this, or whatever.
Yep.
A peer accepted medical journal article.
Sure. So the Canadian Medical Association Journal is called the highest impact, most well thought of medical journal, peer-reviewed medical journal, in our country. And last year, the most read article in the Canadian Medical Association Journal was the 2020 Clinical Practice Guidelines for the Treatment of Obesity in Adults. And there's a journal version and there's an online version. And you can access it through Obesity Canada or the CMAJ, Canadian Medical Association Journal. And it took more than 2 years to write. Again, Canada is a global leader in obesity science and prevention and management, even though, by the way, that's not saying much. We're not great, but we're just better than everyone else, by the way. So I know it's not necessarily saying that much. We have a lot of room to move. And so, yeah, that's where I would point. I mean, we now have a national guideline that is written by indisputable experts and based on strong science. And then, you know what, I don't have the paper in front of me, but Rebecca Poole, P-U-H-L, wrote a wonderful study recently that describes what's the problem with bias. Well, so what? Maybe people need a kick in the butt or whatever, right? So what's the problem with bias? And she really systematically describes that people who are trying to lose weight or trying to manage their weight in programs, literally the level of, there's a score for internalized weight bias, a survey to score how much does someone believe this is their fault and feel shame and blame to their struggling with weight. There's a survey that's well validated. And she found that the higher the score on that survey, the more internalized bias the person was feeling. A long list of difficulties were ahead of them, such as more likely to get down on themselves, more likely to suffer stress and depressed mood, and more likely to have difficulties in engaging in regular physical activity and regular kind of changes to their eating that would be positive. So literally, and by the way, why that happens. So I would also, if you're really talking to a healthcare practitioner, it's not only does bias exist, but look what happens if you as a healthcare practitioner are practicing bias, and look what happens to the actual patient, to the individual, and look what obstacles come in their way based on bias. So Rebecca Poole, she was our she won an award at our most recent conference for that paper and others. And so I think that's a very kind of reasonable approach. Yeah.
Thank you. Anthony, would you like to go next?
Thank you very much. My question is, sorry.
I can hear you well, Anthony.
Okay. My question is with regards to weight loss. I'm being seen by a specialist. She's a hepatologist, and she mentioned to me that if I don't lose 20 pounds, I shouldn't bother going back. And that was a few months ago. I'm supposed to see her in another couple of months. And I've since lost weight, and I gained weight, lost weight, gained weight a little bit, lost weight a little bit. So I'm about the same. So what can I tell her? I'm really trying. I'm skipping dinner almost every night, and and my wife is hiding Reese's peanut butter bar from me, and I'm really trying, but it's not doing anything. And now I'm risking losing my specialist now, my hepatologist.
That better not happen. So, wow, Anthony, sorry that you're subject to that kind of a statement. And by the way, probably they're thinking a well-meaning statement. Oh, I'm a hepatologist, and I have a white coat, and I have a stethoscope, and I'm probably going to motivate this person because I told them, boy, you got to lose 20 pounds, and and they feel good about themselves. Anyway, it's the opposite, and that's been disproven to be a method of supporting individuals who struggle with weight. One of the approaches which we talk about is how often do physicians face someone with asthma, moderate or severe asthma, and say, you know what, before you see me next, I want you to just breathe deeper and cough less. And say to their patients who are living with depression, why don't you just cheer up? Like, life's not that bad. You have a nice family. You have a pretty good job. Why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and by the way, that's how we used to talk about depression, right? Mm-hmm. So, ultimately, I know it's a difficult thing because there's a kind of a power imbalance, right? But, the right thing to lean in is that I don't regulate my weight. I have a million-year-old weight regulation system, and I'm living with a real condition called the risk of obesity, which is a complex brain-centered, genetically conferred real medical condition for which you just told me to just eat less and move more, which is considered to be a stigmatizing and biased statement against those who struggle with weight. In fact, as a hepatologist, you would know that semaglutide, which is a medication called a GLP-1 analog, is in a phase 3 study for the treatment of fatty liver, and it's been shown as an actual effective treatment for the real condition that I struggle with, and it's in phase 3 studies. And isn't that what you guys do? Don't you actually identify conditions and treat them? Or do you just advise people? I thought medicine was about recognizing ethically and with empathy real medical conditions and supporting a patient through treatment for improved quality of life and health. Isn't that what you guys do? I didn't think you just told people and dictated what they should do. Sorry.
Can I bring you in my next appointment?
Yeah, you have to bring me in. That's the short answer. That's the short answer. You have to just bring me in. I brought in Dr. Macklin, so I used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to hear that example. I know as a patient advocate,
Sorry, you're subject to that.
Yeah, it's so upsetting to hear that. And it's no longer acceptable for a doctor to say, lose weight and not offer treatment. So the obesity guidelines that Dr. Macklin spoke about offers 3 pillars of treatment: lifestyle modification, which includes cognitive behavioral therapy, anti-obesity medicine, and surgery. So your doctor should be offering one of those or 2 of those, or maybe all 3 of those pillars in assisting you to lose weight. It is no longer acceptable to say lose weight and go off anymore without treatment.
Right.
And that's all I'm going to say. All right. So Michael, please, you're next. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Good morning or good afternoon. I'm Michael Bidu. I'm from Vancouver. I'm running Mind Therapeutics here in Vancouver. So the question is for Dr. Macklin. Hi, David.
Hi, Michael.
I heard you saying a few minutes ago that one of the things that you wish you could do is to actually be there for your patients to help them when they actually need you most, almost like a good friend. And so the question that I have for you, if you were to have a magic wand, how could you help someone like Anthony, for example, to be with him, or with someone like, I don't know, Sandra's mom a while ago before she passed, to be there for them through maybe a digital assistant or a digital therapeutic that it's almost 24/7 with them, I don't know, in their pocket or something like that. So how would you be able to use a technology to do that?
So certainly novel and technology-based treatments are going to be a critical part of the future of treating this real medical condition. We are at the early stages in technology of combining technology with really the science of obesity medicine to create effective treatments. I'm not scalable. I can't see that many people. My professional role is a significant part of my professional role is training through continuing medical education and speaking both nationally and internationally on the principles of obesity as a real condition that is treatable, and going through treatment processes and helping physicians learn that this is a treatable condition, very treatable, by the way. And so, but even the physician community, in our best optimism, will be very slow to transition, and there will be a great place for technology. Technology will be likely an adjunct to think of it as a behavioral treatment on your phone. Will probably be also a very good adjunct to what Sandra mentioned is the other 2 pillars of treatment, which are medication and surgery. And so if the behavioral interventions that are proven to demonstrate significant sustained behavior change and weight loss and decrease in stigma and bias, behavioral treatments do that. There's just too few of them. There's just too few clinicians who are practicing them. And so, yes, there's an inevitable role of technology there that, I'd love to be there with my patients when they're entering into kind of a highest risk time. Remember, I was talking about the time between dinner and sleep. For example, I meet some patients who conditioning has happened where that time of the day and that setting has been paired enough times that they're subject to wanting, this biological drive from the subconscious to calories in the evening. And often very difficult to self-regulate and restrain against that very strong drive because of their genetic vulnerabilities, not the least of which. And so I'd love to be there in that moment. At best, I'm meeting with a patient once every 2 weeks or once a month or once every 3 months. And my dietitians are at best meeting weekly. And so, but technology can be there, right? Most people are with their phone all the time. And so it would be it's a tantalizing prospect that someone would be when their phone, and the phone knows where someone is and it knows the time of day. So if eventually the phone has learned that evenings at home are a high-risk time, you could almost anticipate where the phone an hour earlier would buzz someone and say, by the way, I don't know if you're interested, but do you want to review the principles of kind of struggling with weight and your values and your intrinsic motivation and the automatic thoughts that might come to you in these moments when you're struck by wanting, because we have a sense that you're in one of your high-risk times. Would you endorse you're in one of your high-risk times? Yes. Are you interested in kind of talking this through or going, yes? And do you want to see a video of how you have described how you feel the next day after an on-track evening? And yeah, let me look at that video again. And are you interested in learning what you've endorsed as the automatic thoughts that would give permission in these moments that would come? How it's been a long day and I'm so stressed and this will make me feel better. Do you want to review those thoughts that you've endorsed? And I can't do all that. At that point, I'm putting my kids to bed, right? So I'm not there with the patient. So yeah, there'll come a time when technology will be able to do that. It's quite a tantalizing prospect, and we're probably closer than we think.
Thank you very much, David. I just saw a comment from Joy, said that would be a great app. So,
yeah, very good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Really would. Because we often do that kind of work when we are refreshed, when our frontal lobe has had enough sleep and we're energized. That's usually when we do the review work. But in fact, we need that at our high risk time. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. Noom, there was just a comment. Isn't Noom doing that? Noom is potentially getting there. Right. So that's one example of what's on the market. I wouldn't call it. So listen, I'm a physician. Right. So when someone says, isn't Noom doing that? To me, what a physician hears is it a safe and effective and proven with 1,000 people compared to people with some sort of placebo for randomization? Isn't it proven to show significant sustained weight loss after a year and two, and to be an effective combination with even maybe medication and surgery? The answer is I don't know, because there is no such data yet. So that's how we act. So just a reminder, if we're talking about a real medical condition, you guys deserve effective, proven treatments. We don't have to go through speculation and maybe, and yeah, it sounds good. You guys are deserving. It's not like your doctors with hypertension doesn't say, you should try this medication. You're like, does it work? It's like, I don't know. Maybe some people. Might not be safe, might be. We don't say that. We say, yeah, it was tested. It was tested with 20,000 people, followed for 3 years, and we checked for all possible side effects, and we looked at outcomes. Right? So, right, part of advocacy as a patient is there evidence here? Is it proven? Right? Right, I deserve that, for my struggle. Okay, good.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, yeah.
Rosie, let's check in on the chat box if you've got any questions.
Okay, great. A number have been addressed with some of the conversation around the pillars. A question that's come up from Cindy Getz is, with science against us, how do we lose weight? I have had 2 surgeries and still can't get the weight off without reducing to a low-carb 600-calorie diet.
So comprehensive surgery is behavioral intervention plus the adjunct of medication plus surgery. So Cindy, sorry, I don't know if I see you or if you're available, but thank you for your question. I'm sorry that it sounds like that you're struggling. The answer would be, I would suggest that step 1, 2, and 3 is receiving comprehensive treatment for the real medical condition that you struggle with. It's not something that's answered over a webinar. I would suggest that you're both deserving and likely, again, back to the evidence base, would find support and effectiveness in a comprehensive treatment that would include an ethical and evidence-based behavioral support program with elements of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy rather, and kind of addressing psychology and the human appetite system and countering internalized weight bias and information and even more information around the human appetite system and our drives to food, combined plus or minus an effective and safe medication, combined in reviewing the course of your surgeries. So sorry, I don't have and by the way, not myself, but others kind of in Obesity Canada, there has been kind of a rap against us that, oh my God, this sounds so difficult. Yeah, I get it. It's a complex, so we're screwed. So what you're saying is, our brain's defending against fat loss, and there's no treatments really available to me around me where I am here. So is it hopeless? But the opposite is true. I really, really want to make clear. I mean, there's a psychiatrist somewhere in the group here today who I'm working with, who's sitting in with me with patients. And patient after patient, people are doing great, right? I don't mean to sound anecdotal, but with comprehensive and ethical and effective treatment, which you deserve, which you should ultimately demand at whatever level and to anyone who will listen, yes, effective treatment exists, and you're deserving of it, and your struggle is valid and real. And we're in just a brief note, we're in a process now where the next 5 to 10 years you're going to see remarkable developments now, people might say, well, medication for weight management, isn't it about just eating less and moving more? No, we're in a dramatic place right now, and will be over the next 5 and 10 years, where there will be effective and safe medications that are an addition to the behavioral pieces that we've started talking about today, that change the game by actually addressing the appetite. Where your genetic vulnerability is where the medication acts. By dampening. What if that drive to calories was a 2 out of 10 instead of a 9 out of 10? Wouldn't that give you more space to pause and stop and say, do I really need this? And actually, am I really hungry? And actually, won't I feel better if I don't? As opposed to the very powerful and overwhelming drives that you might be facing in this progressive, genetically conferred medical condition. And so, yeah, demand effective treatment, know that you deserve effective treatment, know that your struggle is valid and real. That would be my answer to the question. And follow up, and please see if you, not easy, because I understand there are not ethical evidence-based weight management physicians or programs on every street corner. I get that. But we're evolving, and so you try not to settle for less if possible.
Jamie, Rachel, you have a question.
Yes, hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Jamie.
I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on when you were talking about the body set point, because I noticed what you say, like, and I've been talked to about it before, that I have, like, my weight used to be very low when I was younger, and now with genetics, I believe, and a few other things, I've gained a lot of weight, and every time I lose weight, it does go back to a higher weight, and it's such a struggle. I want to know, how do you beat that struggle?
Great question. So I might sound a little like a broken record, but I think I'm doing it for a reason. It's a really good question. So I have cramping, and I have loose bowel movements, and I have ulcerative colitis. What do you suggest I do? Right? The answer is you receive treatment for the real medical condition that you're struggling with. So I would use the same answer, right? I would say that you are deserving. It's not something you should do. It's something that you should do in concert with effective and ethical and evidence-based treatment for your real medical condition, of which you are deserving treatment for. So I know I sound like a broken record, but it's not going to be a tip here, or cut back on this, or do more of this, or change your sleep, or be kind to yourself, or all those things are very nice, but you're deserving of treatment, effective, long-term treatment for a long-term chronic medical condition. And so if that sounds stigmatizing, I hope it feels the otherwise, right? It doesn't take responsibility away from you, right? Someone's still responsible for managing their diabetes, but it's a real medical condition, and treatment exists. So the answer is getting effective and ever progressive, effective and safe and ethical treatment. That's it. I don't know if you have any other specifics, but rather than going through specifics, that's what I'd suggest at a high level.
Okay, thank you. We're going to take one last question before we wrap up, and that's from Barb.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Dr. Macklin, I just want to say thank you tremendously. I'm a member of a support group and have been for many years, called TOPS, and you have lifted the burden of self-imposed guilt off my shoulders in such a significant way. I wish all of our members could be listening to you right now. Your message is so very empowering.
Thank you, Barb, for saying that.
So much.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
Thanks, Barb. What a wonderful way to end the session. So we want to offer our sincere thanks to David for generously giving us your time today. My biggest takeaway is that we are deserving of ethical, evidence-based treatment and that our struggle is valid and real. Over to you, Rachel.
Well, I first want to say that I believe that Dr. Macklin is the reason that Canada has such a strong voice in the world of obesity medicine. So congratulations and thank you so much for that. The biggest takeaway for me is when I am in the middle of that wanting episode, I'm going to think about my cat. And I've seen my cat wanting food and knowing what's happening when I go to the cupboard. So I'm going to create some parallel there so that I remind myself it's a tough time and there's a certain thing that's happening in my brain right now. Just wait it out.
Is it weird that I want to give my dog a treat now? It's about to do that right now. So get involved as a member of our Obesity Matters community. We will be sending out a survey and would appreciate you completing it so we can continue to build programs that are recommended by you, our community. Be sure to tune in to our next session on Thursday, September 30th at noon Eastern. And it's called Breath and Wellness. Reviving a Lost Art with Dr. Florence, and I'm not even going to try her last name, but do tune in next week. Thanks, everybody.
Sorry, one last thing. On Obesity Canada website is access to practitioners. I saw that question, where do we get support? Where do we get help? They're on the Obesity Canada website. There are places where you'll be told about in the community who's around, who's considered to be kind of credible and ethical and evidence-based in weight management. Thank you.
Yes, and there's also, another clinic locator is on My Weight, What to Know, and their clinic locator is more, there are more options. So try both.
Right.
Go over to Obesity Canada
good.
and then My Weight, What to Know. They've got great clinic locators. Thank you for that. All right, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.